Um, Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a post-film discussion for the documentary Not Going Quietly about Addie Barkan, the most powerful activist in America. My name is Christopher Everett. I'm the program manager at the Southern Documentary Fund. Before we get started, I want to give a huge shout out to our screening partners throughout the South. Also, the Southern Circuit screenings are funded in part by a grant from South Arts, a regional arts organization in partnership with the National Endowment for the Arts. For more information about the Southern Circuit and South Arts, please visit www.southarts.org/Southern Circuit. Today we have with us the director of Not Going Quietly, Nicholas Bruckman, and also the producer of Not Going Quietly, Amanda Roddy. How are you guys doing today?
Great, how are you?
Going well, it's going well. Cool. I guess I will start off with this. After watching the film with my wife, I think the first question that came to my mind is, how did you guys find out about Addie? And also, what inspired you to tell a story?
We met Adi in the very beginning of 2018. In addition to making documentaries, Amanda and I work on all kinds of political advertising and films for brands, for nonprofits, for political candidates. And in early 2018, I got a call from Liz Jaff, who folks who have just seen the movie will recognize, who's Adi's partner in crime and political strategist at the Be a Hero campaign. And she said, I just met this guy on an airplane and it was this really crazy situation, but we're starting a healthcare organization called Be a Hero. And at first it sounded like almost a little like cheesy, this idea of like raising money off of his illness. But we saw the video of him confronting Flake, which was incredibly powerful, but never could have imagined where it could have gone. And so I went out to Santa Barbara in 2018 to interview him. And that very first discussion is actually in the movie when Adi is topless and saying, let's get started. It was really the first time we rolled the camera on him, and it revealed this real profound depth of his character that was much more than I think we could have imagined. And when we, finished the interview, we recorded this Kickstarter for a future film, because already he didn't have a long time left to speak. He had already been sick for about a year at that point, and we knew that his time with his natural voice was limited. And that was where we began the discussion. It was still some months before we got to sit down with Rachel, and Amanda, you can tell that part of the story if you want to jump in.
Oh, when we chatted with Rachel and Adi.
Yeah.
I think we sat down with them in the winter and proposed the idea of making a feature-length documentary, and also didn't shy away from all that would entail. Adi had planned to go on this crazy RV road trip from California to Maine. And in that, we knew that there would probably be the makings for a feature film, just due to the volume of footage we would probably capture on that. And so, we floated it to them. And I think they had a conversation between the two of them, because, as you know, making a documentary requires a lot of someone's personal time and a lot of vulnerability, and a lot of allowing a crew into your home at times where you just prefer to be eating dinner with your family. And they had that discussion, and ultimately what they told us is that they feel like, although it's a lot, they felt like it was important both to the healthcare movement, but also for them as a family to have this kind of time capsule of Adi's work and the things he was doing at this point in his life, so that when Carl and Willow, his children, get older, they can have a better understanding of who their father was and why he was fighting for the causes that he was fighting for.
Oh, man, excellent. I'm always curious, because I'm a documentary filmmaker myself, about why someone makes a film. People always ask me the same thing as well. I guess the approach, being a documentary filmmaker, I didn't know what to expect. I guess the approach of it. So when I'm watching, I say, okay, you're doing like a verite style approach. And also I like the use of cell phone footage as well. Talk about that. Like when you put this together, the cinematic approach going, forward with it? Like, what were you guys thinking? What were you imagining when you were putting this film together?
Yeah, I think, and I'm sure Nick can add to this. We had a very scrappy approach, as did the activists. I think we kind of tried to mirror that. And it's an independent documentary film. We had a small crew. We were filming in all parts of the country all the time, so we had to rely on skilled shooters in different states, a couple in California, a few who decided to travel with us across the country, and some local to New York and DC. So when it came to the cinematic approach, I think we were lucky in that this kind of scrappy collage of different cinematic styles came together in a way that mimicked a lot of the activists who use their cell phone footage to approach bird dog and confront politicians. And it was also just kind of the style we fell into in having to be on the road with them and having to be quick thinking. We were also shooting on our cell phones too, and some of our cell phone footage made it into the film, because sometimes to get the best shot, you just need something tiny and to shove it up in a dark corner and like hope for the best. And so that is a long answer to what our approach was. We kind of did the best with what we had, and we're rolling with the punches. Obviously, narrative films have the luxury of having a little bit more time to set up shots and make everything look beautiful. But I think that there's a nice authenticity to rolling with the punches and having a whole host of cinematic formats congealed into one feature film.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Chris, to that is that one of the many constraints that we had on the project, a lot of people wonder about sort of some of the ethical stuff that goes into filming somebody with a degenerative illness like this. And one of the key ones for us was that Adi really didn't have a lot of speaking time in a given day. You see in the film that he runs out of his natural voice in a very dramatic moment on stage, and then later permanently as he gets his eye gaze technology and tracheostomy. And what that meant was that a lot of the times we couldn't interview him. There was this temptation, I'm sure you recognize it as a filmmaker, where you just always want to check in with your protagonists, like, where are we now? What are we up to? How are you feeling about that? And for most of that trip on the road, which takes up most of the middle act of the film, we never talked to him really directly, because if he spent that time talking to us in interview, it would be a speech that he might not be able to give later, or a chat with his family that he couldn't have because of how weak his voice was becoming. And that actually had this really strong aesthetic effect on the film, which was that we had to just shoot verite of him speaking to everybody else. And I think it ultimately makes the film stronger, because instead of being driven by interviews in relation with the audience, we get to experience Adi by virtue of his relationship with his audience, with his family, and through verite in the film. So that was something that informed that aesthetic choice.
Oh yeah, I loved it. It was excellent. I loved also the voiceover throughout of Adi as well. It was a great film. Very great choices. And it's funny how it plays out that way sometimes. But it was a great choice. Also, I had another question. How long did it take you guys to shoot this? And also during this time of shooting, what were some of the barriers or some problems that might have came up along the way?
It took us about 2 years to shoot everything, 2 years and some change. That was the really heavy part of production. And in those 2 years, I think we collected about 300 hours of footage that we had to eventually go through and make a movie out of. And then in terms of challenges, there were a great many challenges. Like I alluded to earlier, I think the fact that we were filming in so many different places all the time, that was really tough. It's tough to fly out all the time to try and capture things. We relied on a really strong network of cinematographers, one that was based in LA, or a couple that were based in LA, who could shoot up to Santa Barbara when we couldn't, to capture moments with Adi. Another thing that was really tricky too is just, I think what Nick was referencing earlier too, is just deciding what was important to film and what wasn't. Because with Audie, you become really aware of how precious time is, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't using up any of his time or his voice or his energy that was unnecessary, because we wanted to be sure to give that time back to him to, spend with his family and continue doing the work that he loves. So always striving to make the best film and capture as much as possible, while also balancing what was necessary and what wasn't, so that he could lead the most meaningful life during that period of time as he could, was something that I think weighed heavily on us. And certainly is something that you can't perfect, but is something that was really challenging to think about.
Cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nicholas.
No, I agree with all that. I mean, another thing that I think was hard, of course, was just becoming close to Audie, which both Amanda and I did, and his family. And I think it was very, challenging to see somebody that you care about experience ALS and go through that, but also incredibly rewarding. And I think one of the many takeaways that I hope people get from the film is a deep sense of gratitude for the time they have, for the bodies they have, a sense of purpose. And so I think what was probably the most challenging was also what was ultimately the most impactful, and ultimately what we want to convey to audiences, which is this question of how do you deal with the cards you're dealt, and make the most of an otherwise meaningless situation like this and turn it into something good, which is what Audie does. So kind of at an emotional level, that was what was hardest about it, but also the most powerful.
Yeah, I know, just watching the film, and just seeing Audie, going through this, and keeping up the fight. And you always saw that he was in hot spirits, always, even though he was going through this. And I'm like, man, I could be doing more, and it just shows you just the human spirit. And it doesn't matter, what your background is. If you want to fight for something, you have to fight for it. And I really think this film shows that, and shows his spirit as well.
It helps that he's incredibly funny, and that was something that really drew me in and subverted a lot of my expectations about what that original short film was going to be like when it turned into the feature, was the humor with which he learned how to deal with this situation, almost the way he kind of weaponizes humor to make people around him uncomfortable in a way that forces them to consider what, the choices they're making. It's this very barbed and hilarious way of operating in the world that I think makes you ask those questions of yourself.
You're right. I know another question is, when I was seeing the credits, how did you guys get the Duplass brothers and Bradley Whitford involved in the film as executive producers?
Yeah, we were really lucky. Audie is good friends with Bradley Whitford. He officiated his wedding to Amy Landecker a couple of years ago in Santa Barbara. And, he introduced us to Bradley, and Bradley is good friends with Jay and Mark, and thought that this would be a good fit for them. Something he was like, would you be comfortable with me sharing this with them? And we were like, yeah, definitely. And they really liked it. And I think, like Nick was mentioning, Audie's humor, I think, really stood out to them. They're pretty witty guys, as you know, and I think they were really taken with him and his story in the same way that we were. And we were lucky enough that they decided to jump on board and support us.
Cool, man. That's amazing.
Yeah, they were really helpful, and both kind of guiding it creatively and also stewarding it to industry through their relationships. But I think what I really admire about Mark and Jay's work is that it's all the political is very much inflected with the personal. And I don't think people think of them as political filmmakers per se. I think they think of, they're known for their independent kind of and comedic approach to things, but there's usually a deeper layer to the work, and some things that they did that I really admire. Like, they had recently made Wild Wild Country right around the time when we started working with them, which was a documentary series that I really love, because it has these elements of politics, but told through this, humor and crime and just larger than life characters. And that's what I think they saw in Adi.
Cool, cool. I guess the next question is, what you were talking about earlier, you guys shot, I guess, over 300 hours of footage. And I know getting in that editing room to figure out how to put all this together. Talk about that process of editing this project when you have all this footage. Talk about that process, what that process was like, how was it, deciding what to keep and what not to keep?
You want to start?
Sure. Yeah, we had a lot of footage, and I think in some senses, Adi's story is very linear, because we tell the story for the most part chronologically, except bookending it with this momentous moment where he testifies in Congress. And in one sense, we had the help of having that timeline to give us that framework. But on the other hand, we had this incredible challenge, which is that Adi's voice deteriorated rapidly throughout the film. As you know, Chris, you might take an interview from here and put it here, a soundbite from here and put it there, and the audience is never the wiser, right? They don't know that you did that last interview on the last day of shooting to tell the story of the first day of their life. But in this movie, we couldn't do that because Adi was noticeably different sounding every time we spoke to him. And that forced us basically to only have the material of him at that point in his life to use. We could never go back at the end and say, hey, let's have you retell that story about how you met Jeff Flake. It was just too late. And that moment was transient in a way that his life and health is, and gives it every word all the more importance. And that had a big impact on the construction of the film and forced us to explore this use of his computerized voice as the narrator of the story, which is the framework that the opening of the film has. And that's revealed in the third act where that voice is coming from. So it's interesting with all of these challenges around what Adi was experiencing. There's this parallel where Adi turned this utterly horrific disease and incredible tragedy into this tool to heal our country and to help other people and to make people see meaning in their lives. And this parallel is that in our process, we had this huge, difficult limitation, right, of making a film about somebody who's losing their ability to speak. And yet that created these creative parameters that we ultimately embraced and made the film stronger. So this idea of embracing your limitations as a filmmaker is really interesting and important to me, whether that's your low budget, so you come up with some kind of interesting free location, or you can't do the VFX, so you figure out how to do it practically, or your character can't speak, so you write a new framework for how the story will be told. Those things I think are really interesting from a filmmaking standpoint.
Yeah, totally. I guess, also with this film, it also just highlights just the failures of our healthcare system in America. And also, I think the lack of understanding of ALS. I know here in Durham, we lost a legend in the architectural world to ALS, Phil Freelon, legendary architect, done some amazing things over the years. He died a few years ago. And that was kind of like my first experience of actually kind of knowing about it when he died. And also seeing, this film as well has just brought, more awareness to it. I guess traveling with Adi and this group of organizers, seeing them, fight this fight, and then also seeing the house flip and them getting the votes and, getting people rallied to vote. How did that feel, capturing that and being with him when he's seeing those election results?
Yeah, I think for both of us, certainly it was really moving and inspiring. The period of time in which we were filming this was deep in the Trump administration, and it was a time that felt really hopeless to a lot of us. And to see and to be kind of working with these real life heroes, in my opinion, was really moving and really energizing, and gave me a lot of hope in a time that was relatively hopeless. And that was an incredible gift. And I think it was a huge impetus to finish the film, to make it as good as we possibly could. And we knew that if it was having this much of an effect on us in that moment, that it would have a huge effect on so many other people and give them that hope. So I think it was kind of a driving force for us in terms of getting it out there and making sure other people could experience this too, because it was a really uplifting and unique experience, and one that definitely, yeah, was energizing and made me hopeful for the future.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, except that I would say there were many times where I think in the film it feels very upbeat and there's all these victories that were ultimately achieved and led by Adi, but it was never felt that certain while we were shooting, right? When you watch this movie now, you know, the outcome of the 2020 election and the 2018 election and of the Kavanaugh fight. But when we were filming, and that extended to Adi's health and his voice, I mean, we didn't really know that his voice machine was definitively going to work or that the tracheostomy operation would go well. So there was a lot of, fear and uncertainty in making this politically. And so when we saw the impact that he ultimately had on our country and saw him rise, and then we were in the room filming with Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and seeing other people recognize this guy in a way that he did in 2018, that made it all the more gratifying, because none of it was assured. And we're very, very blessed and happy to see that Adi's still doing well and is still doing his best work, and his health is stable overall in light of this disease, and he's still out there fighting. And I think that was our biggest hope, was that this film would be not just something that would inspire other activists, but around healthcare, but actually make people aware of him and what he's still doing. And that's happening today, and we're really glad that the film is a tool for him and his movement.
Cool. I guess, what can we do? You have audiences watching this film. What can we do as an audience to help, help with the film, to help with Adi's cause and his movement? What can we do?
Well, the film just released today, October 5th, if this is shown later, on iTunes and Apple TV and Amazon Prime. And so if you didn't get to see it today, or if you did and you want to tell your friends, please share. You can all finally watch it at home, which is something we're happy to share, especially after the pandemic, where we had a proper theatrical release, which is something we could talk about also at length, but was a challenging time to release a movie. And so on the film front, spreading the word is really important. And then it will be out on PBS in January. So that's one way, is just making people aware of Adi and his story through the film. But on the activism side, I'll let Amanda take that one.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can go to joinadi.com and you can find all the issues that the Be a Hero campaign is taking up, what their next steps are. You can follow their Twitter account. Adi's very active on Twitter and is a great follow, especially if you want minute by minute updates. And yeah, that's the main thing. And in general, just participating in rallies and protests in your local communities, figuring out who your local progressive community groups are, and just showing up, or even donating a few dollars to causes that you believe in, local candidates that you believe in who are supporting healthcare and universal healthcare especially, and voting in small local elections. All of those things really, really help and go a long way.
Excellent. I think I have one more question before we head out. Nicholas, you touched on it just briefly. As a filmmaker, I know there's been a lot of challenges with COVID. We have films that we're trying to put out. I guess talk a little bit more about that, some of the challenges you guys faced getting this film out during COVID.
Yeah, well, we had this really difficult experience. I mean, as did the rest of the world, in April of 2020, when the movie was supposed to premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival. Adi was in the process of booking his ticket to fly out to New York, which is of course a big deal for him. And he was really the first amongst other kind of writing on the wall we saw to see that this festival is probably not going to happen. And then South by Southwest canceled, and then Tribeca shortly thereafter. And we were devastated because we'd spent years working on this and we didn't know, anything at that point. Of course, we couldn't have imagined how crazy the world would have been turned upside down. It felt very personal at the time, like our movie premiere. Of course, it was probably the least of the world's problems. But that was hard. And then fast forward to 2021, we kept working on the film throughout that time. And it premiered at South by Southwest in 2021. And that was an all virtual experience, which of course didn't feel the same as a filmmaker to get to share the film in front of audiences. But it was still really impactful, and we won the audience award there, and we got lots of messages online about how much the movie had touched people. We found our distributors there. We did have a regular traditional theatrical release, and similarly, we found that it was an incredibly tough time to ask people to come into movie theaters. A lot of the audience for this movie, of course, is also folks who are older, and we want to encourage folks with disabilities and healthcare issues themselves to see it. And so my takeaway from this, and I think other filmmakers might be different, is just to really embrace digital distribution, embrace social media. It's tempting to resist and want to have more traditional outlets for film screenings. And the pandemic, of course, accelerated a lot of changes in cinema that were happening in terms of the kind of demise of the traditional theatrical model for films. And that doesn't mean we should cede all of our power over to the streamers. But even in digital models, what we're doing right now is trying to work with a lot of community groups and schools and organizations like South Arts to bring the film digitally into people's homes. So I would say that just because you're doing things digitally, you can still do really great and deep community impact work, which is of course what we really care about. And it's a good place to end on, because it's a place to mention that very grateful to South Arts for bringing the film to communities in the South where we might not get to travel to necessarily, and where it's really important that the film gets seen. I'm from New York City. Addie's in the liberal bastion of Santa Barbara, California, and we think his story resonates with people everywhere. We hope that it does. And it's really this organizing work that he's doing. What's so impactful about it is he does it in places where people don't often get to go. So to be able to do this virtually and hopefully mobilize and inspire people in communities where this political work is really needed is really, really wonderful.
Cool, excellent. I guess we'll end it on that note. Again, thanks everyone for joining us for this post-film discussion of Not Going Quietly. Also, if you want to stay in touch with the crew and the whole film, they have a great website, notgoingquietlyfilm.com, notgoingquietlyfilm.com. Definitely check out the site, sign up, support the film, support what they're doing. This is an excellent film. Again, thank you guys for joining us. Peace.